Erling Haaland is an incredible striker, but what has got him to be the absolute beast of a striker that he is? How can a player get to these levels where he is literally unstoppable in front of goal? Is it talent? Well, that's part of it. Is it physical prowess? Well, that's another part of it, but there is something bigger, and it's part of his mental focus and his mindset, but it's probably not what you're thinking. Now let's get into this big factor around Haaland's approach, and I'm going to show you how you can utilize this within your game. And also stick around towards the end where I'll be giving you a guided visualization around what we're talking about today, so you can literally condition this to move your game forward powerfully and automatically. And that video is also available here on YouTube, and I'll link it at the end. So, Haaland, the best striker in the world. It's hard to argue with that right now. The best. But let me ask you a question right now. Do you want to be the best? Now, more than likely you do. Now, that might be the best in the world, the best in your league, the best player in your team. And many top players also talk about being fixated and driven to be the best. But there is a bigger driver for Haaland, and indeed the very best players, and whether they realize this or not. Now let's look at some research around athletes who focus on being the best. Now what this shows is that they often suffer from performance anxiety, as studies indicate that when players obsess over comparisons and rankings, they experience stress, and this causes them to go into what I call red brain control. And this causes their performances to actually get worse, all when they're trying to use this to get better. And if we take a deeper look at the brain, there is a big reason for this. Focusing on being the best triggers the amygdala, and this is the center of the red brain that I've just mentioned. And this part of the brain is responsible for fear and stress. When the amygdala is activated, decision-making suffers. Now, the prefrontal cortex, responsible for strategic thinking, is stopped from operating effectively, leading to poor performance when you're under pressure. So if we shouldn't focus on being the best, what should we focus on? Well, let's bring Erling Haaland back in. Now, in interviews, Haaland often mentions focusing on refining specific aspects of his game. Things such as positioning, finishing, hold-up play. This then will reduce pressure, and it will keep his mind on continuous growth, rather than being bogged down by the expectations of perfection. Haaland's training focuses on gradual improvement. He breaks down his game into small, attainable targets. But there is still something bigger than all of this that makes Haaland unstoppable. But indeed, when we talk about Haaland's development, he often talks in interviews crediting his goal-scoring success to minor adjustments in positioning, timing, not just his talent and his physicality. And brain science backs up why this approach is so effective. Neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to form new neural pathways through repetition and learning. And when Haaland focuses on small improvements, he is leveraging this neuroplasticity. He's ensuring that his brain continues to adapt and it continues to optimize performance. And additionally to this, there's a psychologist whose name is Carol Dweck, and she wrote the book called Mindset. And in this, she explains this a little further. Now, her theory explains that focusing on effort and improvement leads to better long-term success than focusing on outcomes. So these would be outcomes such as being the best. Athletes who adopt this growth mindset will experience less anxiety and are much more resilient when facing challenges. So, having said that, am I saying now that instead of simply focusing on being the best, it's better to simply focus on a growth mindset? Well, yes, this is a part of it, but it's something more specific. And just before I hit you with that, there's another aspect that backs up what we're talking about today. And again, it's around neuroscience. Now, research here highlights that focusing on improvement will activate the brain's reward system, specifically a chemical called dopamine. And this dopamine boost will encourage players to keep pushing themselves, as it creates a positive feedback loop that reinforces improvement. So what I want to suggest to you is that rather than focusing on being the best, which we now know can cause performance issues, is not just a growth mindset. A growth mindset is great, but it doesn't really give us anything specific to focus on. It doesn't give us the competitive edge to move forward. What I suggest is that rather than focusing on being the best, you focus on being the best at getting better. Now, by doing this, you incorporate that dedication for improvement in the ways of Erling Haaland and other brilliant players. But additionally to simple growth, being the best at getting better keeps the more competitive and dopamine-enriching edge without the issues of stress and anxiety of comparing yourself against others. And that is the trap that simply focusing on being the best can bring. Now, doing this can then be a long-term strategy and a focus that you utilize in every training session. Pretty much everything you do, in fact. And as promised, there is a video that's going to be on the screen now, which is my guided visualization around this, helping you to condition this being the best at getting better approach, so you now can start to bring this to life in your development.